More anonymous sources, more of them have come out to talk about the Jets and the issues surrounding the organization as a whole. We're going to dissect all the latest news coming out of Florham Park. But first, let's get this intro rolling and get it started.
It's time for Football with Faria.
You got to get the offense right, and you got to be able to be aggressive. They put up 14 against the secondary. That is driving me up a freaking wall right now.
Now here's your host, Nick Faria.
All right. Hey, happy Friday evening to you all. If you guys are listening via your car ride home from work, if you guys are just getting home and wanting to settle down for the night, appreciate all of you coming on to join me. For those of you that like the show, I think we can do better. Any tips, tricks, anything that we should be taking into account, let us know. Like, subscribe, do the whole thing on YouTube. You guys want to call in, link down below in the description on YouTube. We also have our live chat going on right now with the link as well. So a lot to get to today. New York Jets, you think about it, a positive sort of spin on things over the last couple of weeks, last couple of days. Eddie Jackson, you had Cody Whitehair of the Chicago Bears. Both players were seemingly released by Chicago as of yesterday. Both players could be nice depth pieces for the Jets going into 2024. Both will be free to sign. We have some news as well because 4 contracts have been voided. Dwayne Brown, the offensive tackle, Carl Lawson, Jordan Whitehead. Those guys, those contracts are voided. They are now going to be free agents once March rolls around. They have to incur about a dead cap hit of about $15 million. But in the way the modern NFL is, nothing really to worry about. $15 million dead cap is nothing. But the big news today comes out of not from a beat reporter specifically, but Tony Pauline. If I have the pronunciation wrong, I apologize. Those of you watching, let me know if I do have it right. But he came out with another anonymous source-filled report from sources both inside and outside the organization, majority of them coming from outside. People that are giving their opinion on what's the problem with the New York Jets. The article, of course, can be seen on Sportskeeda. I'm trying to get the full pronunciation here. I want to be able to pull it up as well. But the one major point in this one, as opposed to other things that we've heard from The Athletic, the one difference is that this goes after everybody. Every single name is getting dragged through the mud here. In this latest report, again, by Tony Pauline. And guys, let me know what you think about it. If this is more of a hit piece, if you guys feel that this is bogus. But Sportskeeda here came out with a post from Pauline today, basically dishing out all the problems. All the problems. And the first name on the list, the first name in the article is Joe Douglas, general manager. Remember, from The Athletic, when we had The Athletic report coming out back in mid-January, the report essentially dished everything on Robert Saleh, all the problems with Robert Saleh and his coaching staff and the way he was running things. Joe Douglas really wasn't attacked in that. He had one line where they made a joke about it, but that was about it. And in the grand scheme of things, Joe Douglas got off very nicely when it comes to The Athletic report. This wasn't the case here. They go after him. They go after him on Sportskeeda. And quite frankly, it's a little different because it's not just people within the organization. It's people outside. Quote, the literal quote from Pauline's post here on Sportskeeda. Some have told me Douglas is too nice for his own good and doesn't lay down the hammer when he needs to. He made the joke about Douglas ceding control to Aaron Rodgers, but essentially pinpointing the mistake of drafting Will McDonald and not getting someone like Jackson Smith-Njigba. And the one thing that I'm going to tell you guys, and I've been saying this all year, for those of you that think I'm full of it, I've been saying this all year. The Will McDonald pick makes sense. It made sense back in April of last year. It still makes sense to this day. If you look at the tape, and at some point when I start to hammer out a schedule on this particular show, I think I might be doing Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays now, just because it's a little bit easier on me as I look for full-time employment. But if you look at the Will McDonald tape, there's some good stuff in there. I think personally, Will McDonald showed more in his rookie season than Jermaine Johnson did in his. Because you saw the bend that everyone loved coming out of college. You saw the aggressiveness, the over pursuit. And there's, of course, some things he needs to work on. He needs to get stronger, number one. But the Will McDonald pick makes sense. Because when you talk about value of a draft pick, you don't want to draft someone in 5 years. You're thinking about having to pay him at the top of the position, and the position's not very valuable. The perfect example I have is Saquon Barkley with the Giants. The Giants could have taken a quarterback with the second overall pick or taken Quentin Nelson. The value is there. The value is always there for offensive linemen, quarterbacks, and pass rushers, particularly in the first round. You know what positions aren't very valuable? Because you're going to have to pay them eventually? Running back, linebacker, safety. To a point, wide receiver. Wide receiver is kind of that barometer, that sort of middle ground of, yes, it's good value if you can get one, but there's a lot of different factors in play. Pass rushers, quarterbacks, those are always the guys that need to be valued high in the first round. If you're stuck between a pass rusher and somebody else, a linebacker, a safety, take the pass rusher at all times. That is the mantra of the modern NFL. Pressures and sacks matter more than tackles. It's just the name of the game, and it's just how people look at the value of each position. So Pauline's piece of people criticizing the Jets for not drafting Jackson Smith-Njigba over Will McDonald, I think that's more revisionist history and people trying to say, hey, I had this first. They made the wrong pick here. But it's still a pass rusher. And now, because you don't have to spend $20 million on Bryce Huff, you're not going to have to spend $20 million on a free agent because you have two potential starters in both Jermaine Johnson, John Franklin Myers, and you have your third down pass rusher in Will McDonald. That is solid roster construction. That's a solid pass rush, guys. Whether you like to admit it or not, the Jets' biggest weakness this offseason is not going to be pass rusher. It's just not. So Will McDonald, the people coming out of the woodwork and saying McDonald was a bad pick, he didn't show enough. Jackson Smith-Njigba did it, and he has a crowded receiver room. Are we sure that JSM would have been as successful in Seattle as he was in New York? He was the third option with the Seahawks, and he grew into the number 2. But we look at it from the perspective of, okay, right now, they absolutely would prefer JSN over Will McDonald. Would they have preferred it, though, when Corey Davis and Alan Lazard were unknowns going into the season? Corey Davis's retirement changed a lot of different things. Changed a lot. So going back to April's draft, no, it didn't make sense to draft JSN in the first round because you needed a little bit extra help on the offensive line. You couldn't get Broderick Jones, so you go best available. And if the best available is Will McDonald, then the best available is Will McDonald. There's no problem with that. You weren't taking a corner. You weren't going to take a running back or a linebacker or a safety because those aren't valuable spots. If they felt the more valuable player long-term was Will McDonald, then it makes sense. So Pauline's piece here, and I'm going to dissect pretty much the whole way here, guys, because there's some things here that I haven't heard that kind of goes against what others on the beat have heard. So we're going to dissect it all today. So that's the Will McDonald piece is the main point that I think a lot of people, and I will say, kind of may not be entirely truthful. Not saying that this report is wrong, and you're never going to hear me question a reporter's ethics or anything else like that. But there's some things here you look at and say, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Going through it, I mean, just continuing. It's the complaints about certain things, and Douglas taking his lead from Aaron Rodgers and not being assertive enough. Exit interviews after the 2022 season, Woody Johnson decided to interject on several occasions. Quote, when Johnson chose to be part of the interview, Douglas was described as being a bystander, which is not the norm for most franchises. Do we think that happened? I think that's certainly a possibility. Certainly a possibility. Not questioning anything. And if that's the case, we have no idea how the structure of the organization is. We have no idea how they run things. How the Jets run things is different from how the Philadelphia Eagles run things, and so on and so forth. Howie Roseman does not really conduct end-of-year interviews with the players. He doesn't. It's mostly the head coach. So if this is more about exit interviews with his staff, maybe that's a different story. But if it's about the players, I wouldn't want my GM having so much to say to these particular players. It should be the coaching staff. It should be the coaching staff. Going through this again, we're going through the breaking news piece out of Sportskeeda with Tony Pauline. Inside Football with Faria. We are 10 minutes, 12 minutes in. You guys have a question, want to call in, the link in the description on YouTube down below. We also have it in the chat. We're going through this piece by piece. But the next piece, so they talk about Joe Douglas's misses and how his misses are far greater than his hits. But the one thing that I will say to that, and in defense of Joe Douglas, and again, you guys have heard me on this show. You've heard me on Jake Asman's show. The big part of why the Jets struggled this year in 2023 was Joe Douglas. His inability to make moves, get aggressive when the team needed him to be aggressive. That was the big thing that sunk the Jets in 2023. 100%. But if we're going to overanalyze his misses over his hits, I think we clearly look past what the Jets have done from a roster construction standpoint. When Douglas took over, this was a team that wasn't very good and very low on talent. The Adam Gase years blew through that talent like nothing else. There was just nobody there. We understood that. We all understand that. So building this roster from scratch, I feel Douglas in that context has done a good job. Think about the players that he's drafted, guys. Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, Joe Tippmann, Elijah Vera-Tucker. You have Sauce, Quinnen Williams, Jermaine Johnson, McDonald. Quincy Williams wasn't a draft, but he was signed. Jamian Sherwood, who looked really good last year. Tony Adams, Ashton Davis. There are guys here on this team that are significantly better than anything that came before them, particularly from the previous regime. So I'm not going to sit here and say, well, this article's right because they missed on Zach Wilson and they missed on Laken Tomlinson and they missed on so many other different guys, because I don't feel that gives the whole picture. You know who's missed a lot as a general manager? Howie Roseman. That guy misses all the time. Think about it. Like, look at his draft record. Jalen Reagor, miss. He picked Jalen Reagor over Brandon Ayuk. He took J.J. Arcega-Whiteside over DK Metcalf and A.J. Brown. You guys know who J.J. Arcega-Whiteside is? Good. You probably don't. I never want to hear from him again. That's the point that we're trying to make. He misses a lot in free agency. He missed on almost every single free agent of the 2022-2023 year. It's not all dollars and cents, and every move has to work. Howie Roseman is a great GM. You want to know why? Because this dude is going to miss, and then he's going to keep swinging. And he swings, and he swings, and he swings. That's why he has so much credibility around the league. He's not going to get fired in Philadelphia for the exact reason that I just said. He misses more than he hits, but his hits are massive. Terrific on trades, terrific in salary cap management, terrific in building rosters from scratch. To sit here and say that Joe Douglas is Howie Roseman is wrong, 100% wrong. But to sit here and say that Joe Douglas should be fired and has a terrible outlook outside the league, I think is also wrong because he's a well-respected guy. People that I've spoken to say Douglas will be hired before anyone else if he were to get canned. He's very well respected. So I don't know about some of these other points because I think this has more to do with people outside the organization that maybe have an axe to grind. They talk about Keith Carter and the dysfunction that he has. People think that he's the worst offensive line coach in football, wouldn't get another job. I think most people would agree with that overall. Wouldn't be surprised by any of that. Going through that list. Trying to get some brightness here. Looks like we're good. But the key point to this, outside of Douglas not having a firm enough hand, is the piece about Rex Hogan, the former assistant GM of the New York Jets, essentially saying that Rex Hogan was the leak for the majority of the season. Now, he doesn't go into detail about the leaks coming from The Athletic. But the Zach Wilson, he points to the Zach Wilson story back in November where Wilson was tentative to play and it got out. Pauline is suggesting that it was Hogan. Now, the one thing that I will say to this, I'm not going to say if, ands, or buts, but I am going to point out that Connor Hughes stated that Hogan's mutual parting of ways had nothing to do with what happened with the anonymous sources. So I'm not going to question this report, but I do want to point out that Connor Hughes is someone who's as plugged in as anyone across the New York Jets organization, and he made a point that Hogan was not elite. Take it that what you will. But again, Tony Pauline, it's his Twitter account. You guys can take a look at the piece. It's well written. A lot of sources outside of the organization. But the one thing I looked at, and I said this earlier today, can this franchise get 1 month of peace? 1 month. I mean, we talk about the craziness of the Eagles, and I've been very disappointed in Eagles fans, but I haven't seen anything like this. Eagle fans are pissed off. People in the organization are pissed off, but it's quiet now because it's the end of season. Who is trying? Which people fired and have an axe to grind with Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh? Why are you talking in the middle of February? That's my question. Not to do with the report, because Pauline clearly heard it from somewhere. But are you seriously saying that, listen, I need to get this out, I need to vent, and it's mid-February, so let's do this? It looks bad on some of these sources. Now, it doesn't look bad on Pauline. It looks bad on the sources itself. Just ridiculous. From Hawk today, can confirm Zach was benched for Boyle and made QB3, only to be asked 2 weeks later to save Saleh's job against the Texans. He was indeed hesitant, but did it anyway. Listen, I'm going to sit here and say this. I don't think it was to save anyone's job. I think what ultimately happened was the Jets were pushed by someone to make a quarterback change. And Joe Douglas made the change, benching Zach Wilson for Tim Boyle. They saw Boyle for 2 weeks. It was horrific. They go back to Zach Wilson. He plays really, really well against the Texans. Probably his best start as a quarterback. I would say that it was his best start. What do you guys think? But after that and before that, if you're in Wilson's shoes, you get it. And this is kind of what I said back in November on Jake Asman's show, where I said, I understand Zach Wilson's hesitancy to go back on the field, but also you have a job to do. And if your team says, you know what, we tried it a different way, it didn't work, let's go with Zach again, then that makes sense. You have a duty as a quarterback of your organization. So to that point, I understand both sides. I understand Robert Saleh making the change because I do think that it was done by somebody kind of pushing. But in the end, he went through 4 quarterbacks. It's not Robert Saleh's fault that the best quarterbacks he had this year were Zach Wilson, Tim Boyle, and Trevor Siemian. It's not his fault, guys. It's not. This is what I've been saying all year. If they had gotten a backup quarterback, a competent one, a Carson Wentz, if you will, if they brought in Carson Wentz and they started and got out to, let's say, 8-3 or 7-4, 7-5, and they collapsed down the stretch, that says more about Robert Saleh than anything else. The problem is we didn't get that because the front office essentially said, we're not going to spend money on a backup quarterback. We're going to ride with Zach Wilson. That's the problem. That's the premise here. It wasn't Robert Saleh's fault they didn't get another quarterback. It's Joe Douglas's fault that they didn't, or somebody else's fault within the organization. That's the problem. It's just not. It's not good. Got a question here from Dane O. Of the four, Whitehead, Hardy, Davis, and Bryce Hall all are expiring. Who are we letting walk? This is a great question. And I have an article up on Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation site for the New York Jets, if you guys want to take a look. But I dissected this fully. And quite frankly, I think only one of these four names is staying. I think Jordan Whitehead is gone. I think Bryce Hall is gone. And I think Justin Hardy's gone. I know people are going to be surprised by that. I understand why. Special teams captain, really good on special teams. But you can get and you can fill Hardy's role somewhere else, maybe even a little bit cheaper. I think Ashton Davis is going to be staying because I really liked what I saw from him this year. Every single time he was on the field, he was making a play, whether it was a tackle, a forced fumble, an interception. He was everywhere on the field. And those are the kind of players you need. Those are the kind of players you need. So if I were to venture a guess, and this is solely a guess, this is not based on anything that I'm hearing. If it's between Hardy and Davis, I would rather the Jets give more money to Davis than spend it on Justin Hardy. Sorry. I prefer the guy who can go out there and play a lot on defense and not just on special teams. Davis can play both ways. He's going to be your third safety probably. But I don't see where bringing in someone and keeping Hardy and letting Davis walk, how that's productive, because now you're not only just fitting and trying to improve a safety room that has one starter, but you've got to fill two positions now. Because a lot of the modern NFL is all about having three safeties and having four corners on the field. Those dime and nickel packages are so important in the modern NFL. Hardy's not going to be your safety. Ashton Davis can. The value is more. Davis is more valuable to the team than Hardy, even with the leadership concerns, or I wouldn't say concerns, but the leadership that Hardy brings. It's more valuable. His time on the field is better. Davis's time on the field is better because he can play on special teams and defense. You can't put Hardy on the defense. It's just the case. KJ in Colorado. Hardy missed a lot this year. Davis is a very good special teams player as well. Also contributes on D. Hardy does not. This is exactly my point. Completely my point. Completely my point. Oh, JD and Saleh share 50-50 blame in this quarterback failure. JD in drafting the wrong guy, Saleh bringing in the wrong guys to develop the wrong guy. This is an interesting debate. This is an interesting point. Because in Pauline's article, it cites the Zach Wilson selection and saying that Rex Hogan was the guy pounding the table for Zach Wilson. And the one thing that I'll say, I don't know if it's 50-50. I really don't. Because if we're basing this and we're talking about the topic of who's to blame for Zach Wilson not being good enough, I think that has more to do with coaching than it does the GM. Consider this, guys. Consider this. The Jets had, the second overall pick that year. And it was expected to be a very deep quarterback class. Everyone knew at least 5 quarterbacks were going in the first round. At least 5. So if you're the Jets, everyone knows you're taking a quarterback. Everyone knows you're taking a quarterback. Is it Joe Douglas's fault that the quarterback class of 2021 was just a bad one? Surprisingly, a bad one. We were talking about that draft class as being transcendent. You had Wilson, Justin Fields, Mac Jones, Trey Lance, Trevor Lawrence, 5 guys that were surefire picks to be taken in the first round. Everyone knew it. Everyone was saying that this was a great quarterback class. Is it Joe Douglas's fault, though, that everyone knew he had to take one and just picked one of several bad ones? Trey Lance is a third quarterback now. Mac Jones might be out of the league. Justin Fields has not been a very good passer. Yes, he can run with the football. That's all very well. But he's been terrible as a quarterback. Terrible as a throwback passer. The only one who has been acceptable is Trevor Lawrence. But we can also argue that Lawrence has been nowhere near the type of prospect we should be expecting out of him. Nowhere near it. And they brought in Doug Peterson for it. Hawk, your comment here. We should have drafted Justin Fields. I'm going to get to everyone's comment and questions as well. But just based on this argument, we should have drafted Justin Fields. Way more proven. Salah should have brought in experienced offensive staff to cultivate him. And they did the opposite. Took a project and rookie OC. Kind of like what the Houston Texans did, right? Kind of like what the Houston Texans did. Bobby Slowick didn't have a lot of experience as a play caller. Gerard Johnson didn't have experience as a play call, as a quarterback coach. What the Texans did was the exact same thing as the New York Jets. They brought in assistants from the San Francisco 49ers. And it worked out because CJ Stroud's the better player. It didn't work out for the Jets. I don't want to say that Mike LaFleur was the problem because I think it was just they had the wrong quarterback. They got Stroud. Stroud was the right pick at 2. Was Zach Wilson the right pick? No. Is Justin Fields, would he have been successful with the Jets? Probably not, guys. Because we can pinpoint all the offensive coaching staff changes they've had. But we have seen young quarterbacks blossom with number 1 wide receivers. They brought in DJ Moore this offseason. And the offense was pretty much exactly the same. He runs the ball really well. He has really bad deficiencies as an overall passer. It's part of the difference. And you look at Ohio State quarterbacks, majority of them struggle coming out of the National Football League in their first year, in their second year. Fields is going in on year 4. And it's the same problems with him. I don't think that if he was drafted by the Jets at 2, then he would be far more successful because there's no guarantee that he makes it. He's dealt with injury concerns. He's gotten hurt every year. How do we know that he would have been able to save the injury bug that Zach Wilson couldn't? It's part of those problems. We've got Connor coming on here. Connor, welcome to the show. I'll unmute your mic. You got a question for me, man? Connor, you're live here. Football with Faria. You got any questions to come? All right. No, guess not. But that's my point. Because with Justin Fields, there's no guarantee that you would have been successful. No guarantee whatsoever. What they did, the failure behind Zach Wilson is, as KJ put it here, there was no veteran option. Zach Wilson was a project as the second overall pick. He needed time to develop. And the Jets didn't allow it. The Jets did not allow it. And that was their problem. It wasn't that, they picked the wrong quarterback, and any other quarterback in that draft class would have worked in New York, because we have seen with evidence every quarterback from the 2021 class has struggled in some way or has not risen to the expectations that come from a top pick. What they should have done, what the Jets should have done, is sat Zach for that first year and let him grow. Let him learn the game. Don't throw him out there week one. They did the wrong thing by just giving him the job. I agree with this 100%. 100%. Here's an interesting question here, or point from Red John. I think the Jets should focus on the O-line more in free agency. Take a receiver in the draft for salary cap purposes. What do we think, Jet fans? You guys okay with the 10th overall pick in one of the deepest offensive line classes in history? Solving your offensive line problems in free agency and then going wide receiver at 10. Personally, I completely disagree with it. When you have an offensive lineman, you get him, and a first-round offensive lineman, you get him for 5 years. And if you get the right one, you have the right guy protecting your quarterback, whoever it is, once Aaron Rodgers retires. This is 100% an offensive line heavy draft. 100%. If the Jets are smart, they solidify the receiving core in free agency, get guys that Rodgers will be comfortable with, 1, 2, 3-year deals, and you draft offensive linemen for the betterment of your franchise long term. Think of it like, I remember the joke for the Cincinnati Bengals the year after Joe Burrow played. The Bengals had, the 6th overall pick, 4th, 5th round pick? And everyone was saying the Bengals should draft Penny Sewell over Jamar Chase, because Penny Sewell will block for Joe Burrow for over a decade. Jamar Chase will be here for a decade, but there's no guarantee that Joe Burrow will be 100%. And what have we learned? They've done a lot of great things. The Jamar Chase move has done a lot of great things for the Bengals. But Joe Burrow now has been lost and dealing with injuries for 2 of his first 4 seasons being in the National Football League. That's not hyperbole. That's not a guess. That's not trying to be nice. He has dealt with a plethora of injuries because he is getting hit more than almost any other quarterback. When you come to the draft, you want to make sure the major needs are solidified. But if the needs are there in a place of high value, you can push it off till after the draft. And that's what the offensive line is going to all be about. Think of it this way. If we're talking about the long-term future of the Jets, not just thinking with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, the long-term future, what's the right move? Taking the offensive lineman that's going to be around here for a while to protect whatever quarterback is next? Or drafting a receiver and saying, okay, we have the skill guys, but we're still not sure about the offensive line. We're going to have to go in the draft once again in a couple of years. This is too deep of a receiving class, too deep of an offensive line class to pass up on these guys. Olu Fashanu probably is the number 1 offensive lineman picked in last year's draft. Same with Joe Alt. And these guys are in the same draft together. Talise Fuaga is probably considered a top offensive line prospect, probably number 1 from last year's class. And last year's class was deep. This group is incredibly, incredibly talented. Incredibly talented. One piece from Hawk here. Not only for cap purposes, but rookie tackles never play well. If we're depending on drafting and starting a rookie left tackle, we might as well burn this thing down now. I don't know about that. There's new evidence and there's current evidence to show that Hawk is correct. Andrew Thomas needed a full year. Trying to think of who else. Andre Dillard was taken in the first round. He was thrown in at left tackle, and he is now going to be unemployed after a terrible year in Tennessee. The Jets with Mekhi Becton. Really the only guys from his draft class, Becton's class, that performed admirably and actually have solid careers are guys that started at right tackle and then naturally moved over to left. So there's some point to this to say taking a tackle and moving him to the right side to grow his experience makes a lot of sense. But if you nail the pick, you could eventually have a Jonathan Ogden type player. You could have those guys that are plug and play day one, like Penei Sewell. Penei Sewell was really, really good his rookie year, guys. Do I think Joe Alt and Fashanu can be like Sewell? Absolutely. In some ways, I think Sewell and Fashanu are very similar in terms of their overall prospect build. Guys that are really good in pass coverage. May need to get better in the run game. But Sewell's the example here of plug and play, day one. He's been the left tackle for years now, and he's still an all-pro caliber player. And there's obviously exceptions to everything. Lane Johnson was drafted as a left tackle out of Oklahoma. They moved him to the right side, and he's been a Hall of Fame player there that they haven't even considered moving him to the left. Didn't even consider it when Jason Peters was gone because they felt that they could trust Jordan Mailata to be the left tackle of the future and leave Lane Johnson there at right tackle. So if we're judging the tackles based on who can start week one and be the plug and play guy, it's Joe Alt and Fashanu. I think both players are there. Again, this is not a normal tackle class. Broderick Jones needed multiple weeks to develop into the player he was. And he looked great for Pittsburgh when he played. But he did not start week one. He was not the week one starter. I believe he was a mid-season change. And it turned out that it was a really good change, but it was a mid-season change at right tackle. That's a difference. You need a guy that's going to play immediately. And if we're looking at the class right now, who are the guys that can play right away week one? Fuaga, Alt, Fashanu. Those are the three. In my mind right now, that you give them the starting job at whatever position they have, and you let them rock. An interesting point here that I do want to bring up in free agency is what if the Jets bring in a competent veteran starter like Tyron Smith to play left tackle? Tyron Smith comes in, plays for a year, maybe two, and you draft Fuaga at 10. Or you draft Olu Fashanu at 10, and you have him playing on the right side. And then naturally transitioning back to the left, kind of what the Browns have done with Jedrick Wills, and kind of what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have done with their tackle prospect. It all comes down to this. It all comes down to that. When it comes to the NFL draft, you're coming away with a tackle in the first round. I think that is a surefire bet. Everyone I've talked to has circled Fuaga and said, if he is available at 10, the Jets are taking him. If Fashanu is available at 10, the card is already being rung up. And that's kind of my point. You want to solidify the key positions. That's perfectly fine in free agency. You want to bring in another guard. You want to bring in a starting left tackle, a number 2 wide receiver, depth at defensive tackle. All that can be done before the NFL draft. But to get an offensive tackle at 10, to trade up potentially and get an offensive tackle, that's what you should be doing. That's what should be the plan. The plan in place right now for the Jets should be very simple. The first thing they do is sign a wide receiver, a competent, really good number 2 wide receiver. That's number 1. Day 1 free agency, if we don't hear Jets have signed wide receiver XX to be their number 2 option next to Garrett Wilson, then it better be coming, and that better be in the works for the fan base. Because that's number 1. Number 2 is solidifying the depth at the position of offensive line, bringing in some guards. That's why I tied in Cody Whitehair last night when he was released by the Chicago Bears. Is Whitehair a starting caliber offensive lineman now? Of course not. But is he a capable backup? I certainly think so. A guy with plenty of experience, running a lot of different offenses. I think that would be perfect. That's the kind of guy you want to back up AVT or Laken Tomlinson. And I still think that there's going to be a chance that Tomlinson gets restructured and stays in New York. There's enough tape out there to show that Tomlinson, he wasn't as atrocious as many people say. He wasn't as good as many of his homers feel. But I think he was just a below average to average guard. You get Cody Whitehair, you at least have the opportunity to have quality depth at the offensive line in the interior. You bring in Connor McGovern back, 1-year deal. Poor guy obviously was lost for the season with the season-ending leg injury, but potentially bringing him back to back up Joe Tippmann. And then you go after the left tackle. That should be the goal. That should be the order of things. You need depth. And it's easy to say this because the Jets answered their depth question last year, and then all the depth guys got hurt. Every single one of them. So as much as we can say, oh, they should plan for injuries, of course that's the case. But they planned for injuries last year, and it didn't matter because all the guys got hurt. So in that way, Joe Douglas does get the pass of, well, in free agency, you brought in some guys. It just didn't work out. We understand. The Connor McGovern signing and pairing him with Joe Tippmann at center, that was a great move. Because now you have your center of the future who you didn't throw into the woodwork right away, but you saw him develop and play pretty good football along the way. And now you can bring in McGovern to sort of back him up and add that starter-like protection in case Tippmann gets hurt. Those are the kind of things you want to have. KJ in Colorado says, Jets should have a viable starting 5 going into the draft. You never know what will happen before 10. This is where I disagree with KJ. Because let's say, hypothetically, the Jets bring back Mekhi Becton on a 1-year deal to be the swing tackle. They bring in a guy like Tyron Smith. They bring in Cody Whitehair. And, I don't know, let's say they throw in McGovern as well. Let's say they get all 4 guys. Relatively cheap, friendly deals that allow themselves to answer the depth. But they have a need at right tackle. Are we still going to be upset that they don't have all 5 solidified? Of course not, because this is such a deep tackle class. One of 2 things is going to happen. One of 3 things is going to happen. Either Joe Douglas trades up for Fashanu and Alt. He stays at 10 and drafts Talise Fuaga. Or he trades back and gets a guy like Tyler Guyton or J.C. Latham. Quality guys that I think will probably need a couple of years, maybe need a few weeks to develop into the player they need to be, but projects that you can throw in early and allow them to have their growing pains at right tackle. That's a solid offensive plan. That's a solid offensive plan. Hawk, then everyone knows who we're picking. Of course. But everyone kind of knows who you're picking now. Rich Cimini broke it at the Senior Bowl. He literally said the Jets are going all in on Talise Fuaga. He is the apple of Joe Douglas's eye. They're very excited about him. If we're to think that Rich Cimini is true, which he's one of the best reporters out there, of course, but that's the case. Boom, right there. But the other thing, and I'm seeing other comments of you don't want holes going into the NFL draft. This is where I disagree with you, and this is where I say that's not always the case. Philadelphia got to the Super Bowl last year. They got to the Super Bowl last year, and they had the 10th overall pick. They had needs at tackle. They had needs in the secondary, and they had needs at linebacker. Everyone and their mother knew that if Jalen Carter fell to as low as 9, Howie Roseman was going to trade up and get him. Everyone knew it. Everyone was saying you can't let Jalen Carter fall to Philadelphia at 10. That would be a disaster upon epic proportions. Just because people know who you're targeting doesn't mean that's necessarily a, oh my God, what's going to happen? They're going to steal us. You have the examples last year of the Broderick Jones trade with New England and Pittsburgh. But the one thing I think people forget about is New England was going to take a tackle. Fine. So they tried to spite the Jets, and they traded out with Pittsburgh for Jones anyway. The Jets made the decision to trade for Aaron Rodgers. The only way that trade was going to work is if they swapped first-round picks. People are going to be like, well, they should never have made that trade. I saw one guy on Twitter today, this week, saying that the Jets had a stupid trade with Aaron Rodgers by swapping those picks because they needed offensive linemen more, and you could do anything else to get Aaron Rodgers. But that's not always the case. If the Green Bay said, hey, we want to swap first-round picks, we'll keep that first-round pick for you, and you have an opportunity to get Aaron Rodgers, it's a no-brainer. Guys, they didn't give up a first-round pick this year. They gave up a measly second. This was a terrific trade for the Jets in every sense of the imagination. In every sense, the Aaron Rodgers trade not only made sense, but was a fantastic deal for New York. You got him first in a team-friendly contract. And second, you have your draft capital. You have a first-round pick. You have all your picks next year. This wasn't like you traded 3 first-round picks to move up to second overall, kind of like what the 49ers did with Trey Lance. You didn't trade the farm for Aaron Rodgers. That's just the case. That's just the matter of fact. Last comment here from Hawk. So far, Green Bay won the trade. All right. Again, I will say, no, they didn't. When you look at trades and you look at draft capital via trades, you don't make a decision when one of the quarterbacks hasn't played it down. If Aaron Rodgers comes out and leads New York to the playoffs and gets them to the conference championship game, what does that trade look like now? This is why I say, with draft picks, with trades, let's wait and see who comes out victorious with these kind of trades. There are examples where there are clear winners right away. The Tennessee trade with A.J. Brown to Philadelphia is a clear Philadelphia win because Treylon Burks has not been a number 1 receiver for Tennessee, and Philadelphia is already there. Jordan Love had one great season as a starter. Great season. Everyone agrees with that. You win a playoff game, it was an upset, and he looked really good against the 49ers until he didn't. But there's no guarantee that he's going to have a great sophomore season. Let guys develop. Let these trades breathe. Aaron Rodgers is still a Hall of Fame quarterback. At his peak, he is still a top 5 quarterback in this league. And that's the reason why Jet fans, with all the needs that they have on the roster, with all the question marks they have, they're in a good spot because they have their franchise quarterback, they have a number 1 receiver, they have a number 1 corner, and they have their top pass rusher. The only thing they need is their top offensive lineman. I see Johnny coming in here. However, we are going to, you know what? I'll stay on for a couple more minutes. Johnny, how's everything going?
Hey, man, I just saw you were on. I just got back from the office and everything, and I didn't get to catch the beginning piece of everything.
No
what
problem.
You were saying, but I came on because was wanting to know what you end up cooking for Valentine's Day yesterday, because I know you were on the kitchen duty yesterday.
Yeah, so I did chicken breast, some potatoes, and salad. Nice. I am not a chef, but wife loved it. We're rolling with it.
Hey, did you give her the Boy Green special?
The what?
The Boy Green special.
Guys, I'm not a part of the community. I don't know what any of that is.
The chat knows. But hey, what was the stuff that was announced? I've been in the office all day today, so I have no
Well, it's
idea.
essentially another piece where Jets anonymous sources are complaining about coaches, players, and general managers. That's essentially what it was.
I think it's a lot of clickbait stuff and just trying to. It's the off season. There's gonna be so much rumblings of stuff. You've kind of been in there, right? You kind of know what's going on, and every time you've always said, "Don't believe everything," because you said they got everything pretty tight up there and all that. So,
Well, it's not so much they have tight-lipped stuff because there are guys and there's a lot of anonymous sources that have spoken out. And I didn't like the Zach Wilson comments. I didn't like the Athletic in terms of not questioning the report, but more questioning the people, the anonymous sources that wanted to say something. Not going to question any reporting done. Rosenblatt and Rossini know more than I do, more than I ever hoped to know. I'm 27 years old. These guys have been doing it for a very long time. I'm not questioning their reports. What I am saying, though, is it looks bad on these anonymous sources to not bring it out in front of the organization right away. That's my point.
yeah, I think, man, as soon as we start winning, it'll put everything to bed, and dude, the season can't come, man. That's just I feel like we're gonna hear more stuff, is what I'm trying to say.
Of course.
Unfortunately, and until we start winning and given that winning culture, that right then in itself silences everything, So it needs to happen this year. But
Yep.
any more? I did want to ask you something. Any more news on your Eagles and whatnot? Because I haven't
It,
really been hearing anything about them.
well, yeah, I've every single time they have news, but this is what they do. This is kind of why I said early on in the show, it's February. Who the hell wants to talk now? This is the quiet period right before the combine where everyone's going on vacation and relaxing a little bit. So there hasn't been any Eagles news outside of Hassan Reddick, but even then, that's more stuff that we all kind of expected than anything else. Reddick's going to be on the trade block. If they can get a second round pick for him, great. If not, all it is essentially allowing Hassan Reddick to test the open market while he's still under contract with the Philadelphia Eagles.
Do you think we let Whitehead walk and completely sign or bring in Clark and he's going to be the main guy there?
I think
Or
the way to go is you bring back Clark on a 1-year deal, you bring back Ashton Davis, you let Jordan Whitehead walk, and then you bring in a guy like Eddie Jackson to be the veteran of the core of the safety room and allow these guys to sort of develop under a veteran like that. Clark's a veteran, no doubt, but we don't know how good he's going to be off that ACL surgery, and it's unfair to expect him to be fantastic right off the top.
and that Eddie Jackson news insane. I still could not believe that
Cap
happened there.
casualties, man. Cap casualties.
So I appreciate you, man. Keep doing your thing, dude. We're here. We're supporting, man. You
Appreciate
killing
it.
it, bro. And anything we can do, man.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Johnny. Appreciate the call in. We actually are going to end it here. Thank you guys so much for joining on. Well, we will have a show on Monday. Hopefully, it'll be a little bit lighter out now. But unfortunately, not. We're in darkness. But regardless, hope to see you guys next week. Thank you guys so much for listening. And I'll see you all on Monday.